I'll start again now the microphone's on. Welcome everyone to this evening's meeting of Ealing Business Partnership. I'm Andrew Dacres, the Independent Chair. For background and transparency, my day job is Chief Executive of West London Business. So the concerns of local businesses regarding business rates and how and where revenues are invested, our topic this evening, are extremely familiar. Indeed, they're raised with me almost every day. The EBP meets just once a year to meet the statutory requirements of reviewing these critical reports on the Council's financial strategy and business rates. There are a whole range of other forums that the Borough convenes throughout the year around Ealing's high streets and priority sectors. So this is one of many opportunities to engage with councillors and officers. It should also be noted that the Borough is also home to a number of business improvement districts, which again engage with the wider community. I'm sure we're all looking forward to new insights this evening, and we have 2 reports to cover. As well as officers, a particularly warm welcome to Councillor Stephen Donnelly, who is the lead member for Inclusive Economy, who'll be helping set the scene, I think, and inputting to discussion this evening, as well as fellow councillors. Before we begin, on a practical note, I'd like to remind everyone that this evening is being live streamed, and those in the room should use the microphones, something I need to remember myself. And for those online, please keep your microphones off when not talking and use the raise hand feature should you wish to speak. So, our first item this evening, apologies for absence. Have any been received? None to report, thank you. And declarations of interest.
Yes, Chair, I do have a business within the borough.
Thank you. So any more hands going up on that item? So moving on to item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. Have they been reviewed? Are we happy to agree them as a correct record of the meeting, those that were here last year? Seeing some nods. Okay, we'll take them as they are. Thank you. So, without further ado, we're on to our first substantive item, and I'd like to invite, I think it's going to be Emily and also Councillor Donnelly to present the budget and medium-term financial strategy to us. Thank you.
I may comment later, Chair, but other than to say I'm delighted that there is, in fact, a medium-term financial strategy that our councils are able to put together now because of the latest government proposals, but I'll leave Emily to do the hard work.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. That working? Yes, thank you. I'm going to try to summarise in a few slides a much longer document, which is the full budget document that is currently being published and will be considered by Cabinet next week. As Councillor Donnelly said, actually this year we have been given for the first time a 3-year settlement, first time in over 10 years, a 3-year settlement, which does allow the council to look forward and plan on a medium-term basis. I guess having said that, this year we did get a 3-year settlement. We got it in September. Oh, well, sorry, in December, and so there's more certainty for us to start planning now. We've added it into our medium-term financial strategy, but actually it's a first step in us pulling together those medium-term financial plans. So hopefully this is moving through. Okay, so I'm going to set a little bit of context, some things that you will have heard in previous years, although things are now changing, how the council's then gone about balancing its budget for the year, and then just giving a little bit more information on financial resilience and risk. So this slide you will be quite familiar with. For a number of years, I've come here and talked about real terms funding reductions in local government finance, whilst at the same time demand for our services, particularly in adults and children's social care, and more recently in temporary accommodation for homeless residents, have risen. And the government consulted this year on funding reform and a provisional settlement. As previously the funding settlement and funding calculations were very outdated based on 2013-14. And if you think back to sort of what life was like in 2013-14, things have certainly changed, and that funding settlement therefore needed to be updated. So that updating of those formula and the provisional settlement provides a real terms funding increase for Ealing, not for all councils, but for Ealing in 26-27, which increases further in 27-28 and 28-29. So that's great news. But we do continue to have challenges in social care demand and costs, particularly including temporary accommodation. And the government settlement is good. It provides additional funding, but that additional funding and its sort of view of how much councils have available to spend, what it calls core spending power, increases with an assumption that a council will increase council tax. Nevertheless, we've managed to provide a balanced budget through that additional government funding, the council tax and other income and savings opportunities. And what that's sought to do is maintain the investment in this administration's priorities, but actually, particularly with the new funding this year, has managed to provide new investment in some universal frontline services. And you certainly have seen this before, because we call it the squeezy graph. And what that's shown really is since 2021, the council's funding has sort of shifted to one where it's had to focus almost, well, 2/3 of its expenditure on demand-led services, so social care and homelessness. So it's moved from 50% to less than 50% to nearly 2/3. And what that's done in that red section essentially is squeeze some of those non-demand-led universal services that most residents and businesses will understand are provided by the council. Most residents and most businesses don't think about, or don't need to day to day think about, temporary accommodation, children's and adult social care. So sort of the visible aspect of the council, at least to most people, has been squeezed through that funding reduction. So how have we sought to balance the budget this year? So I suspect with any business, you have to take into account that your inflation, any costs that you might have in increasing your pay, increases in your contracts and increases in your utilities. Some of the first things we do is identify those expected costs, additional costs that we're going to have. We then have to estimate the increasing demand and costs, particularly for those high cost and demand-led services of social care and homelessness, and any other costs to meet our statutory duties. The next bit is probably usually the balancing figure. Once you've done what you can do on costs and identified the savings, you can then consider those priority areas for investment. So in order to balance the budget, we've increased fees and charges in line with inflationary increases. We've had a reduction in our pension contributions, so our staff costs, as a result of our valuation of our pension fund. We've had a number of directorate-led and corporate-led savings identified, and as I mentioned earlier, we have had additional government grant funding and expected increases in council tax. So when we've taken into account all the costs we must pay and the income that we've had in, there has been an element that has allowed this year, with the grant funding, additional priority areas for investment. This really is just picking up on some of the detail of the lines that we've had, just to sort of explain that our inflation on staff costs, we've included sort of 3% at the moment. That 6.5, however, includes a sort of underestimation that we had last year that we need to catch up with this year. Contract inflation and utilities, particularly utilities this year, because we've undertaken a specific review, because we had hoped that utilities would fall post-COVID. We can see now that they won't, so we've had to put those increased costs, as I'm sure a lot of the businesses have, into their own budgets. So this really shows where those pressures have been in terms of our increased costs. And you can see there that the sort of increases in budget that we're putting in, budget pressures or growth, are in the adult social care, children's social care, and largely housing. You can see some increases elsewhere, but you can see the sort of big drivers in costs being those three areas. And one of the very biggest costs within the adult social care is our commitment to real living wage in the home care sector. And each year, clearly, as real living wage increases, we have to put that investment into those contracts. So that was the sort of stuff that we've always been forced to do, because that's the costs that we've incurred. And this is an area which we haven't been really able to do for a number of years, and that's consider some investments in public services. So the change in government funding has allowed the administration to consider investing in that red area of that squeezy graph where things have had to be squeezed out. And those include investments in sort of community safety, street lighting, an example of that, cleaner streets in relation to issues around fly tipping, recycling and reuse. I suspect both those areas important to businesses, certainly businesses on the high street. Playground and leisure facilities for young people, and also because of that cost of living crisis and the increase in council tax, an increase to discretionary council tax awards. So hoping it's gone to the next one. So just quickly, I've told you the headline that actually the government reform of funding has been good for Ealing, and that's come about in two ways. Firstly, the government had allowed over the last 10-12 years local authorities to keep the increase in their business rates growth. What happened there is that a number of local authorities, irrespective of their need for funding, were able to keep significant amounts of business rate growth, places like Westminster, places like Camden, and that money wasn't being redistributed back to all local authorities based on need, it was being kept by those councils. So essentially that business rates reset put a lot of money back into the pot to be allocated based on need. And the revised funding formula is very complicated. There's 15 different formula, but I guess what I would say is it based need on characteristics of population, but the key drivers being increases in population, and we know Ealing has increased in population quicker, I think, than others, and also an assessment of deprivation. So Ealing is assessed as having sort of higher levels of deprivation, bigger increases in population, and that led to more funding. It then takes into account relative resource, so how much income it expected Ealing to raise through council tax. So it takes our need, it takes the money it then expects us to do, and then based on what that came out of, any increase or decrease in grant will be spread over 3 years, so nobody gets a shock in any individual year. I think I've picked this up mostly. So that both population and deprivation in relative terms increased in Ealing. And that has led to an expectation of £60 million additional funding spread over the 3 years. So about 20 million next year, 20 million the year after, and 20 million the year after that. That's in terms of general funding. There was also some increase in other ring-fenced grants. So we had some grants specifically for homelessness and rough sleeping, and we've had some additional grants specifically for children and preventing children entering into care. What I would say, though, is whilst that's good news, there's that element of caution that those figures, the government expects us to manage inflation within those figures. It's not going to give us those figures and inflation. So we have to make sure that we can cover any inflationary increases in costs within that. So that's the funding element. Other funding elements are fees and charges. I talked about a CPI increase. And then And then the savings. Again, I think I've covered most of this. The savings the government have picked up that we've got to balance our budget are in relation to pension contributions following our triennial review, some corporately led savings, efficiency savings in workforce, contracts and digital and tech, and then some service savings, particularly in the demand-led services, although those savings were largely agreed in previous years and are the continuation of the medium-term plans for them to make savings. Council tax is a very significant form of funding for us. Growth in the council tax base, so that's more properties coming on in Ealing, provide £1.8 million of funding, and then the additional expectation of increased council tax raises another £9 million. So that Band D council tax, the average council tax figure, is raised by £77 for the year, or about £1.49 a week. And this then summarises our budget. So for 6-7, we've got a net budget requirement. So sort of before sort of corporate funding or government funding, we have net budget of £423 million that is met by those different funding sources. Revenue support grant of about 100 million, business rates retention of 117, and council tax income of about 205. Just expanding on that a little bit, and probably because particularly business owners will be interested in the business rates element of that. You can see that business rates retention probably looks at just over a quarter there of funding our net budget requirement. What I would say that isn't the total business rates collected by the council. We only keep 30% of it. The rest of it goes to GLA and the government. And then there's a complex system of top-ups and tariffs. So if the government believes we collect more than we need, then it would require us to pay a tariff. The government actually believes that we collect less than we need and gives us a top-up payment. So we don't collect all of that from business rates payments. And then the government will also, if it finds that we don't get what we expected, it can give us a safety net payment. And currently, our estimation is we will collect less than expected due to changes in our business rate space, and the government will need to provide us a safety net payment to make sure they get the income that we expect. I'm almost done. So I've set out how we've sort of brought that budget together, some of how we put in the additional expenditure and the additional income. And I guess like with all of you, as you set your budgets, budgets are only ever best guess at the beginning of the year. So we have risks in the year in relation to additional pressures and volatility, particularly in those demand-led services of social care and homelessness. There are risks to delivery of savings, particularly because a lot of our savings are in those demand-led services that are dealing with increased demand. We have expectations around treasury interest that we have. We've made our best guess at what interest rates will do, but they could fall faster than we expect, and that would reduce our interest income. Equally, if interest rates change, inflation is likely to be changing too, and it's possible, therefore, that inflation might cause further increases in costs than we're expecting. Particularly relevant to Nick, my colleague beside me, economic factors, cost of living, and I'm sure all of you as businesses will also be experiencing this, puts pressure on being able to collect our income streams, council tax, business rates, and our fees and charges. And then two things very specific to Ealing is that we have relatively high levels of debt in relation to our historic expenditure, and that provides us with less flexibility really in being able to change our budgets, because once you take out a mortgage, you must continue to pay that expenditure. So we have less flexibility in being able to change our budgets in relation to debt. and we have a relatively low level of reserves. So we're definitely moving up the table, and we've done really well in recent years to try to improve our position on reserves, but we're still in the bottom half, and we've also seen a number of boroughs below us in quite significant financial difficulty. So we don't really want to compare ourselves to them in the reserves table, because we know where they are is not something that is sustainable. So lastly, I'll just pick up those reserves figures. And when we look at our total reserves figure, it sounds like an awful lot of money at about 150 million. But we have to separate those balances out to understand what might be available to us. And actually, by the time we take away very ring-fenced balances that belong to schools or that belong to housing revenue account and tenants, we're left with a discretionary amount of about 37 million, which is just less than 10% of our net revenue budget. So it's not a significant safety net, even though 37 million in and of itself sounds like an awful lot of money. So I think I've picked up what I wanted to tell you today, and tried as best I can to summarise a very long and complicated document, but I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Emily. And is there anything, Councillor Donnelly, you want to add at this point?
I suppose just building on a couple of things, Chair, that Emily said, I suppose, first of all, we would have balanced our budget, whatever happens in terms of the national position this year. We would simply have had less scope to think creatively and expansively in the way that Emily said. We'd already begun to address within our existing means that this gradual attrition against the universal services because of the demands from social care and from homelessness. But this settlement and the fact that it enables us to lift our heads to a slightly further horizon over 3 years enables us to put together new, better, more sustained plans to achieve more in these areas, things which people will both notice and appreciate based upon our understanding how we interact with people, what they tell us is important to them. But because of the work that our officers have done over a sustained period of years, we're in a much better position than some of the boroughs. I'll give you an example. Borough of Croydon, she does, in terms of the allocation within the 3-year budget, double what we were getting on those assessments. But it has already said it needs the same amount in exceptional financial support just for the coming year. So they have no firm foundation upon which to make use of the new money that's coming in, and we do. We have a firm foundation because of the work that we've already done. And I'll just touch on the issue of reserves. One of the interesting things about reserves is that some of the people below us now in this table were well above us a year or two back and have absolutely shoveled money at an extraordinary rate to try to stay balanced. And I think it shows the fragility that's existed within the system. You think about, it's not so much how big's your lifeboat, it's how fit is it for the seas in which it may have to be used. And there've been some pretty rough seas out there, and we're not complacent. We have reserves which are more than adequate for most foreseeable circumstances, but not, as we know, just from as this decade open, not all circumstances are readily foreseeable, and we have to think to protect the future as well as the present. But I'll be happy to, if I can be helpful with any points later, I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you. Now, I always have some questions, but first of all, I'd like to go to the rest of the room. Councillors, we have a few guests with us. Also, I think one or two folk online. So if you're online and you'd like to ask a question, do put up your hand, but it's just the same for those in the room. Can we switch the microphone on for the gentleman?
Not sure how relevant this would be, but how exposed is the local authority as far as money is concerned? A lot of the local authorities went and invested money into various other areas and lost a lot of money like that.
Thank you for that question. You're quite right, and you probably sort of heard sort of in the news. I mean, it was quite a while ago now, but a number of local authorities lost money in Icelandic banks when all the Icelandic banks went bust. In fact, in the end, most of them got most of their money back, but that was, you know, more luck than judgment, I think. So in terms of our treasury strategy, we take a very prudent approach. The vast majority of our money, well, it's now split between two things. First, the government's debt management office. So essentially that money is with our government, the UK government, so is very secure, or as secure as anything can be. If we lose the money there, I think there's much bigger problems in the country than our treasury. And secondly, we've started investing or lending to other local authorities. Now, other local authorities, there's very specific law that essentially allows us, if that local authority weren't able to repay us, for us to directly take money from their tax revenues in order to get that money back. So in terms of that credit risk in relation to where our finances are, we take a very prudent approach. We always say that we don't chase returns, we chase security first. So it's security before returns. Of course, there are, you know, sometimes it look like very exciting options to earn more money on our interest, but this is taxpayers' money. So before anything, we must keep it safe.
Okay. So no investment in mystery solar farms, which I think it's got the headlines as well. Do you have a question?
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Najib Rumi. We have non-profitable organizations. We're based here in Ealing, and we registered with Company House. Name is Mind Health Doctors Rumi. And the basic essence of our organization is to promote health and to prevent disease. Specifically, as the name mentioned, is the mind health. Because I changed the narrative, it's not mental health, it's mind health, because our mind is like a garden and our thoughts are like seeds. We can grow flowers or we can grow weeds. On self-help basis, we are 7 days community center here. We provide free tea, coffee, and sometime food, but we don't have any fundings. It's self-help basis. And I would like to draw attention of, because this is life-saving strategy, because these kinds of services are, and we can, through these services, we can save the taxpayer money and the burden on NHS through preventive health. So I would like to request the funders or the agencies who can help us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So maybe just a question there around funding for the non-profits and sort of voluntary sector and what the outlook might be in the years ahead.
Thank you. And certainly one of the grants that I was talking about in terms of ring-fenced funding is we get the public health grant from government, and that's absolutely around the prevention. And some of that public health grant is distributed as other grants to other voluntary and community organisations. So there's two ways. I guess there's probably a conversation to be held with our public health team, who may have sort of commissioning intentions for work. Certainly all of our work when we need that is commissioned through a sort of council website and portal. So it might be worth you sort of signing up to make sure you're on that portal, so that if there's any council business sort of relating to your services, you will be notified of those. And I think we do events, don't we, with you around being supplier ready for the council. We do as well have some voluntary sector grants and budgets. They are usually done, I think it's on a 3-year cycle, and I think we've got another year left, but there will be an opportunity therefore to be part of that sort of bidding process for our community grants programme within the next year. I suspect will go out for the years after that.
And if I can be so bold as to say, probably also a good area to stay in touch with some of the local councillors who are at the meeting tonight, because they'll have an ongoing sort of view of those opportunities as they come up. So do take the opportunity to network afterwards. Do we have any questions online at the moment? I don't think so. Come in.
Thanks. I mean, I think first of all, just congratulations to the team. You know, it's been incredibly difficult 14 years financially, and you know, delighted that austerity is now ended and we can start putting money back into some of the frontline services that we want to be able to do so. And obviously we've seen boroughs, you know, not a million miles away from here, completely collapse in terms of their financial situation, spend all their reserves. We can look at just neighbouring Hillingdon, who have you know, gone with a begging bowl to central government and having spent all of the money unwisely. One of the key challenges, obviously, tonight this is the business forum. There are big changes to the business rates going forward, and one of the question marks is obviously many high street businesses will be seeing a reduction in their business rates to try and help protect our high streets, but a number of big businesses, of which we've got a number in the borough, will obviously see you know, a big uplift in terms of their business rates. How does that reflect in terms of our risk profile for returns on that, and making sure that we've got significant, you know, sufficient reserves to deal with what that might look like over the coming few years?
Thank you. That is a helpful question, and you're absolutely right. Actually, business rates income is a risk to the council. So the government assumes we will collect a certain amount and then gives us a top up because it thinks we need more. But if we don't collect what it assumes, then that risk falls to us. Now, for 26-27, this financial year that we're heading into, it recognises all the big changes in business rates, which Nick is going to take us through later. So the revaluation, the differences in multipliers, and differences in reliefs. So the government recognises next year at least is a little bit uncertain. And so what it's done is it's created what's called the safety net threshold at 100%. So if we don't collect what it expects us to collect, it will give us a grant to top it up. So we're safe for 6-7. We're not safe after that, where that safety net threshold will slowly reduce so that we'll only be guaranteed a certain amount. So you're quite right. In the event that we have businesses in the borough going bust, no, that's not quite the right word, or that we have them leave the borough, and certainly in this financial environment a number of businesses are struggling, then that will reduce our business rates income, and we won't necessarily be compensated by government for that. So you're quite right. What we need to do, and we have something called in our sort of risk reserves, we have a collection fund equalisation reserve, and that means we have to have enough in there to be, you know, 1 to 3 million to be able to, as a temporary basis, fund any shortfall in that business rates income, because we're not able to collect it.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any hands up online at the moment, so one or two questions. Oh, it's Colin Atkinson.
Hi there, my name is Mohammed Zazo. I'm a local property developer. It's actually the first time ever I've been invited to such a meeting, which is quite interesting. So I'm just going to be a listener today, but I just had a very, very quick question. You know, the Councillor Mahfouz just mentioned about Hillingdon Council. I think they're quite in a difficult situation, aren't they? So where are we in Ealing? If you were to compare us with councils that are doing well, that you can give them like 7 to 10 out of 10, and councils that are doing extremely bad, 1 to 2 out of 10. Where are we in that range?
Difficult question to answer.
I'm just to be honest, I'm just going to be frank. Honestly, I'm thinking, is there any possibility that Ealing Council will ever, in any time soon, at any point of time, that they might be in a difficult situation like Hellenden, for example, which I hope not.
We have Paxman in the room here.
So given I've been in charge of it for 3 years, I would be doing a not a very good job if I thought we were at the low end. I think I would say that we've done really well, as Councillor Donnelly explained. We've got some additional funding by government, and for a number of councils that are getting additional funding, that is just being swallowed up because their demand and their need and their costs mean that they need that funding. We've had some of those pressures and that they've also had, but we've sought to balance them off by other means. So that means now we have an opportunity to invest in. So I think there's very few councils currently probably in the country that will be looking to invest in new services. So I think we're at the sort of top of the scale that way in terms of next year's budget. I think we're sort of towards the top of the scale. I think sort of on that annual revenue basis, we do well, we are balanced. I think we were one of 3 councils in London that added to reserves last year. The others all had to take money essentially from their savings to continue. I would say where our weak spot is our level of reserves. We haven't got those sort of savings or reserves to sort of withstand a significant and ongoing storm. We would have enough, as we said, the discretionary reserves we have are around 10% of our net budget. So I would think we would have enough for 12 months, possibly 24 months, or between that 18 to 24 months where we would need to take significant action to do that. So I would say we're a 7, 8. What I can't say is I don't know in the next 3 years if we would go bust, because it would take significant increases potentially in temporary accommodation, which might see us having to spend another 10 million rather over what we budgeted, which would mean a third of that savings is already gone. So I think we live in a very volatile environment at the moment. So it's quite difficult to sort of be able to give confidence in the long term. What I do think we've done is we have built up those reserves to give us at least that 18, 24 months to be able to take action in the event of sort of any significant problems. But I would say, you know, being one of 3 councils adding to reserves last year, we have to 33 London boroughs, so we must be in the in the top few. So yeah, I'm proud of what the council has done, but I remain concerned about the risks of some of the costs that are very volatile and that we have to deal with.
So a few questions from me. I mean, you've just touched upon temporary accommodation, and you raised that as an area that I think lots of local authorities have found themselves very exposed, and I think some of those that have gone bust effectively have felt the squeeze in that area particularly. Can you, at a sort of headline level, give us a flavour of the strategies that are being deployed by Ealing to control those costs, and I suppose, you know, whether there are wider lessons learned that are being brought into the borough so that it doesn't continue to put a squeeze on other areas?
So that is very difficult, and I have a lot of sympathy for our strategic director of housing and environment. It's particularly difficult at the moment because of the new Incoming Renters Reform Act. We think actually in the medium term that will help us, because it will make it more difficult for landlords to make their tenants homeless. But in the run up to that, we are seeing many more residents being evicted before then. So actually our demand has spiked, but we hope as that Renters Reform Act comes in, that will settle. I think we've still got more work to do in terms of prevention and supporting people before they become homeless. So that's certainly an area of focus. And what we are seeking to do within the council is acquire properties which are at a lower rent in order to place homeless families. So I think we've got more to do, but we have recently, and it's within the council papers or cabinet papers, acquired 2 significant housing blocks that would enable us to house more people. So I'm not sure. It's currently a matter of demand and supply. So we need to do all that we can to encourage supply of affordable homes and affordable properties. It is difficult, and it's difficult because, of course, we're all individual London boroughs, but our boundaries blur. So there will be London boroughs that are housing their homeless families within our borough, which is also taking supply of our properties. So a strategy concentrating on supply to date, and a more nuanced strategy in terms of prevention, I think, coming forward, so that we can support people in sustaining tenancies rather than becoming homeless.
Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Everything Emily said, and Emily and I have spent probably more time focused on this issue in the last 2 years, especially than on any other, and that's in the context of still surging demand in social care. So I think all those things about accessing supply, seeking to monitor and control demand are right. But we're in a system which wasn't really designed for the current situation, I think, either in terms of how councils are financed or structurally as a society in terms of these levels of temporary homelessness. So I think ultimately solutions aren't going to come at local council level. You know, we seek to do the best for our people as it's possible to do, spend our imaginations, do things which 5 years ago we wouldn't have thought were likely to be in our compass. The real solution ultimately lies with improvement in the overall economic situation, with more housing across a broader range of the country, and we're right behind the government's approach to achieve that, and we'll do our bit, but everybody will have to do their bit as well.
Thank you. Come on.
Touching on the same subject of housing, there's a couple of sites which the local authority, I think, were involved with and have since fallen through. One being on the Green, which the local authority was, I think, running with Peabody, and it's fizzled away. What was the reason behind all that?
I think I remember the Green one. I think there was a cabinet paper that came in the last couple of months on the Green. So as you say, that was a partnership with Peabody. It involved council really only as a CPO partner in order to CPO the land in order to allow Peabody to develop.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is that the business case, the viability, just no longer was in place for Peabody without significant subsidy from the council, and the council wasn't in a position to provide that. And the Peabody therefore just sought to exit the arrangement.
Okay.
So the land now new plans and master planning, I think, is now being undertaken for that area.
So would that mean someone else falling in or taking their place, or will it ever revive again?
I certainly think that is the expectation, and there are master plans being sort of developed to do that. There would need to be plans and developers that would seek to do that, but certainly that they are the conversations currently being sort of undertaken on what that master plan might look like. But I certainly don't think the council's expectation is to allow that to just continue to be a sort of a blight really on the area.
Okay.
It's probably fair to say that's a pattern we've seen across a lot of development sites across West London, that as the viability has become difficult, people have had to go back round the circle.
It seems that perhaps, I don't know whether it's huge or small, part of the budget of Ealing goes to homeless families, right? Now, you mentioned that Westminster sometimes, for example, council sometimes relocate their people into our borough. Now, is there any other relationship between Ealing Council and perhaps other councils, maybe on the outskirts of London or a bit further up, that we sometimes could possibly relocate part of the homeless families that we have within this borough into their boroughs? Because I did actually come across one single person, who was in a temporary accommodation in Perryvale. And then all of a sudden, I think it was him, his wife, and 2 children in 2 rooms in a shared house. And then all of a sudden, I think the council asked him to be relocated in Slough. So that made me happy. That gave me the thought that there could be a relationship between councils. I don't know if I'm right.
Thank you, Chair. You're certainly right in that local authorities can place outside of their borough. We tend not to, or there tend not to be specific agreements between councils on that, but based on the availability of suitable accommodation. Now, I am not a homelessness expert, but I know enough, having spoken, as Councillor Donnelly said, being quite involved in that due to the level of overspends at the moment. When the housing demand team assess an individual family or an individual's requirements in relation to homelessness, they will consider them and they will sort of band them in terms of zones. So there will be, for example, if there are school-age children with exams that are currently going to school, they would be placed within the borough so they can still attend their school and take the exams. But where there are sort of less important connections, they may be allocated to different zones, in which case if we're able to provide a property further out, for example Slough, and it wouldn't be detrimental to that family or the resident, then we would be able to place them there to make sure that they have a more suitable property than they might have done otherwise. That's not a direct relationship with the council, but it's because we've been able to source a suitable property in that area that we were able to place the family.
And once you've done that, would it still be Ealing who pays for their accommodation?
Yes, so we take the homelessness duty. The duty is ours once we take them, and then we have to continue to pay for those homelessness costs until such time as we're able to discharge their duty, because they may have been able to find suitable accommodation themselves that they're able to pay and sustain their own tenancies. So once we take on the duty, we have that until we're able to discharge it.
The last question, if you don't mind. It seems that part of the problem as well is the number of residential units that we have, right? So is there any relationship between the financial or the finance department in Ealing Council and perhaps the planning department, where we could possibly advise the planning department that we do actually need more residential units? So they might be able to set up a strategy whereby they could make it a little bit easier for developers like myself, or perhaps, larger developers, big scale developers who can actually help increase the number of residential units within the borough.
Go on.
So certainly, as a borough and as a council, we seek to support development, particularly in relation to housing. I wouldn't say that there is that sort of relationship and conversation between finance and planning in considering planning decisions. The planning authority, so the planning function, the planning authority has its own very specific legislative and decision-making process that the rest of the council cannot interfere with. So the planning department in and of itself would look to encourage home building within its own rules, but that kind of interaction between, wouldn't it be better if we had a larger housing supply planning, you need to take that into account for the council finances, isn't a conversation we can have, because planning have to comply with their own rules and their own requirements, their own planning. They're a planning authority. In a way, they have an authority all of their own. That's not to say that the planning authority would not want to encourage developers. It's just it wouldn't be, because the finance department or the pressures of housing have cross council caused as otherwise I think it would be classed as a sort of inappropriate relationship and an inappropriate influence.
Thank you. I was struck by a headline in the Financial Times today that was actually celebrating Croydon, which is very rare given their history for going bust. But they were being celebrated for the fact they put in place a policy in 2019, which has been allowing a lot more small housing schemes to come forward at a volume that actually hasn't been seen in any other borough in the capital. So I'm sure councillors there must be relieved to have a good headline being generated. Sort of a final question from me, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item. I think, although do we have a question online? We'll come to the question online after my question, then to the next item. If I was to look at my inbox of messages from businesses in Park Royal, I think sort of probably the three themes that sort of have popped up the most over the past year would be the state of highways and potholes becoming perhaps a greater problem than historically, fly tipping, where I should say our observation would be that Ealing Council is very responsive to fly tipping when the council is alerted, but there is clearly more happening in the first place to report. And then the third area concern around parking charges, which seem to potentially be rising faster than inflation in some areas. I wonder what your reflections and indeed the councillors are in terms of whether there might be any good news on those three fronts looking forward.
I'm sorry, I've forgotten the first now. Fly tipping and highways. So certainly in relation to potholes, there has been government funding, additional government funding. Actually, there's been significant progress on there. And in fact, we publish information on our potholes funding on our website, so businesses could certainly look at that. This budget doesn't particularly have any specifics on potholes and highways, but we're continuing the significant capital investment programme that was agreed during, I think, at the beginning of this year. So there's a highways capital programme that would look to avoid potholes, plus the pothole funding and grant funding that we've worked on. In relation to fly tipping, absolutely one of those investments that the administration has invested in this year is a reduction in bulky waste charges. So with a view that hopefully people will more legitimately get rid of their bulky waste. And also two other things, a borough tidy team, which is sort of a hit squad to try to pick up sort of targeted cleaning areas and things like fly tips, and also a pilot recycling and reuse scheme, which will also sort of act as a neighbourhood recycling reuse scheme to try to collect that waste that might otherwise be fly tipped in a more responsible way and in a more sustainable way as well, because once it's fly tipped, it often is contaminated and can't be reused. So there are actually a number of investments in this budget, particularly in relation to clean streets and the fly tipping. So potholes, fly tipping, and now I've forgotten the last one. I should have written them down.
Parking charges for businesses.
Parking charges for businesses. So certainly in the budget, the increase in parking fees is an inflationary one. So 3.8% because we use September CPI. There aren't any additional parking measures in there, but what there is a saving essentially in the budget on parking to reflect the current parking income levels that we have. So there aren't any changes in parking within the budget, but other than the inflationary increase in parking fees.
Thank you very much. There's some good news in there, which surprised me. Online, we have one question. I can't quite see the name, but SS, over to you. We'll need to unmute, I think.
Sorry, can everybody hear me?
We can hear you now, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, my phone dropped on the floor. So I had a question. This was, sorry, going back to Emily. It was in regards to the housing matter. So I've been involved with some other boroughs due to my nature of my work. And I just wanted to ask, because I know that housing is an issue and obviously there is a rise in cost in respect to that. Some boroughs would actually house residents outside of London, maybe even up north, because there is a huge difference in the sense of costs. Is that something that could be maybe possible with Ealing Council in order to ensure that the cost could be balanced, but people that need to be housed who fall within the rules could then also be housed, but then everything could be balanced at the same time, bearing everything in mind?
Yes, so that is possible. As one of the attendees today has said, that we have relocated people within Slough and other areas. So yes, outside London, on a very temporary basis at the moment, we might relocate someone much further afield than that, but that tends to be on a sort of emergency basis at the moment. But we do take into account, as I hope I explained clearly enough earlier, the sort of the requirements of the family, and that would give them a zoning band essentially, which would allow us to place people outside of London if, as you have suggested, if their circumstances mean that that's possible for them.
Presumably, given that duty of care that is ongoing that you flagged, there are advantages to having people relatively close to Ealing in terms of supporting their transition into long-term accommodation, employment, etc. Okay, thank you for the question. I think we're going to move on to our second substantive item, and for that we're going to hear from both Nick Rowe, Head of Local Tax and Accounts Receivable, and also Paul Tyrrell, Customer Accounts Manager. Over to you both.
Isn't it? Right, sorry about that. I was hoping you're trying to get the PowerPoint on. I forgot about the mic. Right, good evening. My name is Nick Rowe. I'm the Assistant Director for Revenues and Payments. And on my left, I've got Paul Tyrrell, who is our Local Taxation Control and NNDR Manager. So any technical questions on business rates, Paul is the man with all the answers. Just as a headline, really, on where we are in Ealing. Obviously, businesses are a key part of the Ealing economy. And I think if you look at throughout all of the council plan, that stands out. We've got almost 11,000 businesses in Ealing paying business rates and a total of 17,000. The discrepancy is those businesses who don't have a business rates for a property and will run a business from a domestic residence, for example. So you can see the numbers. We are a large borough, 14th largest in terms of rates collectible, 28th largest in the country out of 300 plus. So again, it's a sizable number, and the 8th largest in London. I think just to pick up on the comment about property growth, just as an aside, I'm also responsible for council tax. And we've got 150,000 domestic dwellings in Ealing now, and that's up by over 20,000 in the last 10 years. So there has been considerable growth, as Emily said, on our tax base on the council tax side, as well as business rates. It's fair to say that this year we've probably got more changes in business rates than we've had in the last decade. And myself and Paul will go through what those changes are. It's going to be a time of great concern for businesses in terms of what their business rates are going to be. The government, there's probably 6 or 7 major changes, and each of those have got mitigation, transition schemes, etc. So we'll try and have a quick run through, and Paul will be able to point people where they can actually find what their business rates could be for next year as well. For years, businesses have paid one of 2 multipliers. So you either had a large business multiplier or a small business multiplier, relatively straightforward. The government has now changed that, and we now have 5 multipliers. This is all part of the simplification of business rates, which is probably rather ironic looking back at it now. But yeah, so we now have 5 multipliers. It's happened that the multipliers have come in at the same time as we've had a revaluation. We have revaluations now every 3 years, which means that businesses are actually paying what they should be paying, rather than some of the previous times when they were historic bandings and historic values. Crossrail supplement, that's what the GLA charge for Crossrail, the business rate supplement. That is still payable and will be for a number of years. It's only payable by the larger businesses, and previously it was payable by any business with a rateable value of more than 75,000. For next year, that's increased to 92,000 and will stay at 2p in the pound. Okay, despite the huge changes on rateable values and multipliers, the overall outcome is net zero. So the actual yield nationally from business rates will be the same across the country. That isn't to say that business A and business B won't be paying largely different individual business rates bills, but overall it's net zero. I'll let Paul cover the multipliers in detail. Effectively, we've just broken down between now with retail multipliers, which will be lower than the standard multiplier. And there's also now a high value multiplier for properties over 500,000 or more. So this is some of your super size businesses, and they'll be paying a penny in the pound additional, which will help compensate some of the reductions for other businesses. Right, Paul, I'll come to you.
As Nick was saying there are now new multipliers. We had, as far as back as I can remember, there were 2 multipliers, and now we have 5. There are 5 multipliers because, and I want to emphasise this, 2 of them are for retail. The government's, as we've seen on the news, and I'm sure it hasn't escaped us, there are challenges in the high street and in retail, cafes, shops, pubs, etc. So the new multipliers, 2 of them are for the retail, and the small business multiplier is 38.2 as compared to the normal small business multiplier of 43.2. And you've got the standard retail 43p, and the standard non-retail is now 48. So clearly different amount of multipliers for retail and non-retail. As Nick was saying there, we now got the high value multiplier of 50.8p, and that's for rateable values of £500,000 and above from 2026. The definitions of retail have followed on really what we've had in the past few years. And so the definition of retail hasn't really changed very much. It is the multiplier that has changed. We used to have a retail discount scheme, 40%, which is ending next month, is now through the multiplier where the retail reduction is shown. We've got a transitional relief scheme, as we've had before, for a period of 3 years, which will which will automatically be calculated, doesn't need to be claimed, it's automatically calculated from 2026. So if we look at the retail relief scheme, some of the history of it, we were going to have a relief scheme, or we did have a relief scheme of 33% for 2019-2020, and then we were going to have a 50% relief scheme for 2020-2021. That changed to 100% because of COVID-19 and the pandemic. So we have, so just to go through very rapidly, then after 2020-2021 with 100% relief, then it went to 50% relief of retail, 75% 2023-2024, and then this year 40% off for retail. And for 2026, we no longer have a direct retail scheme, it's through the multiplier. Significantly, we had cash caps for retail. Therefore, nationally, you couldn't have a retail discount of £110,000 or over £110,000 and above. We no longer have that. There is no national cash cap now because it's through the multiplier. In addition, we've got film studios. Ealing very significantly have benefits from a film studios relief of 40%. We've got Ealing Film Studios and other film studios in the borough, so they get 40% off. That's going to be through to 2034, and then we also have 100% relief for electrical vehicle charging points. That hasn't come through yet because the Valuation Officer Agency haven't given us the ratings for that yet. But when we get that through, they get 100% off EV charging points. We've also got an improvement relief scheme. Hasn't been taken up very much since it's come through. We've only had 17 improvement relief since April 2024. We get notified from the Valuation Office Agency whether someone's applicable to the improvement relief scheme. We've only had 17. I don't know why, but we've only had 17 of them. But it's a very little take up on that. For the revaluation of 2026, so we've got a full revaluation from 1st of April 2026 for 3 years. We've had the draft lift published we've already, so we've got some figures here. So increase, we've had some increases overall 21%, 21.38% rateable value compared to the 2023 list. And for instance, going back to leisure, we've got an increase of 12.42%, and commercial, we've got an increase of 21.53%. And going back to the help that boroughs will get, we have a transition relief scheme. So you might have heard in the news that, yes, I'm getting an increase in revaluation of a certain percentage. It's not as straightforward as that. You get a transition relief scheme as well to transition your increase between what you're paying now and what you're paying next year. In addition, you've got to the transition relief scheme, you're getting supporting small business scheme as well. Run through that very quickly. So if your bill is increasing and you had the small business relief or retail discount, you can get a cap, or you will get a cap of £800 or the equivalent of transition relief, whichever is greater. So it's, as I say, it's not as straightforward as here's your new multiplier and here's your new rateable value. You are going to get transition relief and supporting small business scheme as well. This, once again, this will be a scheme that will go over 3 years. And this will protect businesses with regard to increases that they will have. And if they've had retail discount or support or small business rate relief scheme, they will get the cap on their bill. You will not get this. You will not get this if you are a charity. You don't get that. Now, the cap of transition relief for 2026, I'll run through that very quickly. So if your rateable value is 28,000 or below, your cap will be 5%. If it's between 28,000 to 100,000, your cap is 15%. If it's £100,000 or more, it's 30%. And just remind everyone, the cap and the transition relief is comparison to £800 if you are entitled to supporting small business relief. So there's going to be that comparison, and it's going to be automatically calculated. You do not have to apply for it. And caps are cumulative. So 27-28 goes, for instance, from 5% to 10%. In 28 to 29, it goes up to 25% cap.
I mean, I think it's fair to say this is going to be problematic for businesses in terms of understanding. It's going to be problematic for us as the team. The government are still making announcements. I think they're realising that certain sectors are effectively at risk. So only last week we had the announcement of the new pub relief, which will come in from April this year, which will give some more protection to pubs. I think the trade had lobbied quite effectively on the impacts of that sector. So you can see the changes that are coming through. In terms of us administering, I think one of the problems we've got is the announcements were made fairly late. We've got an external software company we have to use. We're not getting the release for the software until the 17th of February. And we need to bill a couple of weeks later. So it's going to be very quick for us to get this information and everything on. If your business has seen a significant increase in the rateable value, spare a foot for Heathrow Airport, whose rateable value has gone from 200 million to 900 million overnight. Obviously, they will receive transitional protection. But I think that just highlights we've got to realise that the last valuation that was done was at COVID times, where the usage and the trade that these businesses, all businesses were getting, was very, very different to what it is now. So if anything, this revaluation is probably resettling where we would have been if it hadn't have been for COVID. But it doesn't make any easier for the individual businesses. If you want to check what your business rates are likely to be, on the .gov.uk website, there's a link where you can go in. You can search for any business. It will tell you what you would have been paying this year, what you are likely to pay next year. But do be aware it hasn't got all of the relief. For example, it won't be able to identify pub relief, but it will have the major headlines of your multiplier, your rateable value, transitional relief, etc. So businesses can at least start budgeting for what's going to happen. So business rates demands we're processing on the 14th of March. The one consolation of processing a bit later is 90% of authorities are billing before us. So if anything goes wrong, they can tell us what not to do in terms of the billing process. Council tax has been moved forward this year slightly, and business rates is slightly been pushed back a week, which I think will help us to ensure the accuracy of the bills that are being produced. So the bills will go out to businesses on or before the 20th of March, first instalment date 7th of April. Just to give you an idea of the amount of money we're collecting, you can see the net collectible debt that we've had each year. For next year, it'll go from 191 to 205 million. And you can see the gross rateable values that will increase each time, specifically when there's a reval as well. Okay. Emily's already touched on retention, so I'm not going to go too much into that. We keep, as you can see on the slide, the bottom line is we keep 30%. It's changed a number of times over the years about who kept what. So for all the money we collect, that 200 odd million, Ealing only keeps 30% of it. The rest of it will go to the central government and the GLA. We have got a local Ealing scheme for London living wage, which will pay the cost of double the cost of the accreditation for the Living Wage Foundation. There is a little stand outside around living wage if you want to take a look on the way out as well. That scheme will be extended for a further year. Certainly it's a recommendation in the budget to extend it, I should say. So that will be a recommendation to extend again, and we've had a number of businesses take up, but we do still have scope for more businesses to sign up for that. Okay, that was pretty much what we were going to say on business rates. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but there is so much going on in this field this year. I think we're being swamped at the moment with government guidance, government meetings, but yeah, open to any questions or any comments.
Should probably all wish you good luck with navigating the changes ahead. One question of clarification from me. The improvement relief scheme that you mentioned has been very low take up on. So it was new to me. What does it offer?
The improvement relief scheme. So to get improvement relief, you've got to be in bricks and mortar. So you've got to be paying business rates. If you increase the size of your property or put in new CCTV or perhaps some air conditioning, you can go to the valuation office agency and say, okay, you're going to put my rateable value up, but for a year, could I be certificated to not have that increase? So that's why it's the improvement relief scheme. Your property's benefiting, but you're not going to get your rates bill increase for a year. But as I say, it's not been a big increase. We haven't seen it be increase in that, not many certifications at all.
That's nationally, not just Ealing.
Yeah.
And is that a dip on what has historically been the picture, or has it just always been quite low?
It's a new scheme.
And,
So
okay. Yeah. So,
it's not really taken off.
So no great surprise that I haven't heard of it, and
No.
businesses haven't. Okay. Questions. I'll go first of all to Councillor Lang-Powell and then to the very end.
Thank you, Chair. Well, firstly, on the London living wage, if you're a business rates payer, you will get 2 years of your accreditation fees paid. But if you're not a business rates payer, you will still get your accreditation fees paid. So it's not just if you're paying business rates. And there's a whole host of other benefits of becoming London living wage accredited too. So, as Cabinet Member for Decent Living Incomes, I hear a lot about business rates. At every event I go to, some business or other will come up to me and talk to me about business rates. And often, if they're struggling to pay, it's often a conversation about get in touch. Perhaps we can do a payment plan, because we do ultimately want to support businesses, if they're struggling to pay. But I think much more recently, what I'm seeing is that it is confusing. What we've just seen on the screen, and understanding, like just looking at the slides myself, firstly it says 26-27, no specific relief, just a revised multiplier, but then you have got the transitional relief, you have got the supporting small business scheme relief. So it is quite confusing, and what I've seen in recent weeks certainly is that there are businesses making decisions about cash flow, about financial decisions that will affect them that are coming up, and they're trying to interpret how this affects their business and are struggling with it. In fact, there's one business recently, not just due to business rates, other factors as well, that had decided to close and actually are now not going to close because and business rates being one of the things that they couldn't interpret, and they didn't understand transitional relief was available to them. So I think we are going to see much more of this as businesses start to wonder what it all means for them from the 1st of April, how they interpret transitional relief, small business relief, and all the rest of it. So yeah, I mean, I certainly expect to hear a lot more of that at every event that I go to. More of a comment really, but also I know that you're going to be coming to the High Street Sector Forum to talk to our high street businesses about this in the next few weeks, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more demands being made of you than that. Thank you.
It's like another message of good luck.
I think the one thing I would say is to point all businesses to the .gov.uk website and the calculator, because that will give them a very good indication of what their rates bill is likely to be. And I think that's a good starting point for businesses. It obviously won't include the most recent reliefs, and there could be a few little tweaks, as Paul said, with the supporting small business. But I think it will give a good headline indication of what the bill is going to be, because the initial panic is often people see their rateable value has gone up considerably, but not realising that the multiplier has come down alongside it. So the actual net impact is often not quite as bad as it looks initially. But that would be my one point, initial starting point.
Thank you. Maybe something for all of our email signatures over the coming weeks. It's the end of the tables.
Some of the increases that the businesses might see will be quite significant, and at times they're finding a mission to try and go to the, I think, VOA. They find it very challenging to get anywhere with VOA, and hence, in some cases, starts hurting them very much so right from the beginning.
Yes, it is a concern for us as well. The Valuation Office Agency, probably along line with many central government departments, has had significant cuts. Revaluation time is always incredibly difficult for them because the number of businesses who want to challenge. I think the only consolation is businesses do have a period of time to challenge, and some of the larger businesses will be using the services of rating advisors and will tend not to go on day one. We are working with the VOA to try and speed up the process. It has got a lot better than it was sort of 5 or 6 years ago. But we do still see difficulties. If anyone is got an appeal and is struggling with payments, we do suggest they contact us as soon as possible, and then we can look, as Councillor Nagpal's indicated, we can look at payment arrangements and what we can actually do in terms of our advice on that account as well.
That sounds good.
Thank you. Councillor Mafuz.
Yeah, Nick or Paul, if you could let us know how many snail farms there are across the borough.
We've got 2 or 3, haven't we? Or not? Is it not? They've gone now, have they? Yeah. I know we
haven't got.
We did have one, I think, about 2 years ago. I think when Councillor Mafuz was here. Westminster at the moment have got about 20 or 30, so it seems to be the snail capital of Britain. But as Paul said, no, we haven't got any at the moment, but we did have some, or one previously. I know when you were with us.
And any other changes around that will help us deal with, inappropriate tax avoidance schemes?
Yeah, the government. There's a number of consultations going on at the moment, which we're still waiting for feedback. And one of it was very much so around the avoidance evasion issue. The government are continually saying they will give us more powers to actually clamp down on those people. And some of the empty periods and some of the contrived tenancies that we've seen are now being blocked, and the time period that property has to be empty for has been extended as well, which I think will reduce some of those contrived tenancies that we were seeing. But the government is still looking into some of those at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be very positive news, and an element of fairness for everyone who's working hard to pay their bills.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Come
on. Thank you, Nick and Paul, for all your help so far. So for every small business out there, of which I am one of them, it's great to know that you are there. And I think this is a message I think we need to send to a lot of businesses out there, particularly small businesses, that London Borough of Ealing are here to help. our rates department are here to help them. And I think this is something that I think they are very frightened at coming forward. So I think it's probably a wish for everybody here to make sure that we can all help our small businesses out there. As a chairman of a traders association, where I have a number of businesses that come in when those bills arrive and they do get it wrong. Small business owners know what they're good at, but reading a bill sometimes is not one of those things. So I think it is a big message that we need to send out, that we can help them, and that look, it's going to be challenging. We know it is. From 2 to 5, it was bad enough with 2, so you know, moving to 5 is going to be even more challenging. But I think we do just need to sort of throw our arms open and say, look, we are here to help every single one of those small businesses.
Maybe a question or two for you, Councillor Donnelly. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear your reflections on what the council's doing to communicate all these changes, and indeed where those of us in the room that are engaged with businesses might support you. I know in the past, the sort of theme of getting a 3-year settlement has often been one of the messages from this meeting to the council's cabinet, onto London councils, etc. Are there any other sort of asks that are now in the frame in terms of future local government funding? I mean, we've heard a bit of a plea for more resourcing for the Valuation Office Agency, but any other reflections?
Cool. That was a caucus to finish there, Chair. I think in communication, I think as Nick and Paul were saying, it's kind of evolving in real time, because as we establish what it is we're communicating it. And there are tweaks, and you know, it's that classic dilemma in politics. You know, when does listening appear like last minute panic? You know, if there's no point. People often say to us, you know, at a local council level, you call it a consultation, but you've already made your minds up. Then if you change your mind, you know, well, you backslid, or it's a climb down, or whatever it might be. So I'm pleased that it's them doing it, not me. I mean, we know, jumping ahead to Valuation Office, all of us as councillors know from time to time we have residents who don't get the relationship between the local authority on council tax and the Valuation Office, and they think that we've upped their valuation in order to milk them for more money, and there really couldn't be a more strict divide than there is between councils who collect the money and the Valuation Office who determine the value of properties. And I think just listening to the discussion around, you know, the challenges that the VAO's had with perhaps reduced resources over the course of a decade, and the challenge for revaluation, people ask themselves, why doesn't council tax reform happen very often? I mean, it's one good reason, isn't it? Because there's an awful lot more domestic properties than there are business properties. But I think, and going to your middle question, and it's a little like, I think, as Nick was saying about business rates, this is it's a cost and revenue neutral exercise, but within it there are winners and losers. It's just inevitable, and I think in politics you sometimes feel that the winners will shrug their shoulders and forget it by tomorrow afternoon, and the losers will remember until the end of recorded time. But you have to make these choices from time to time. So I think as Emily was indicating right back at the start, within London, within the changes that the government has made with the medium-term strategy, the 3-year deal, some people have done, relatively speaking, better than others. Some people will be dependent on a kind of transitional support because, you know, they kept and spent too much of their surplus business rates, begun to treat it as if it was revenue to which they were entitled, on the grounds that the previous government kept saying it was going to reset, kept not resetting, and people just began to get into the habit of spending it. We didn't do that. We kept it separate. So I think in terms of, does London local government have, as of today, a single idea of what the next step of local government financial reform should be? I think it probably doesn't. I think everybody is in the process of understanding and assimilating what's happening to us, in the same way as businesses are understanding and assimilating changes to business rates. But I think, and I said this to colleagues a day or two back, I think this is a fundamental enough change to be as close to a reform of domestic council tax as we've seen since it's been introduced, in that it seeks to draw things back to need and affordability, ability to raise money, to try to address the fact that what some of the poorest local authorities in the country have a council tax rate which is 2 or sometimes 3 times the level of some, what would appear to them, some really quite affluent parts of London, and think, well, how is that right? And in the meantime, you have the tsunamis around social care, temporary accommodation, which are hitting these very low council tax councils as hard as they're hitting anybody else, but they haven't got that revenue that they should have been raising, arguably, in order to cover it. So I think this is a step into the future. Where it goes from here, I think, remains to be seen. But more importantly, we've got 3 years to assess how things are going, and that's an unimaginable luxury in terms of how things have run over the last decade. So that's my philosophical tour de horizon, Chair.
I think you've done a fantastic job of pulling together all the threads of our discussion this evening, which has been a rich one. Thank you to everyone in the room. Thank you to all of you that joined us online, and please enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thank you.